True strength doesn't lie in muscles but in the ability to control oneself. A lesson that the biker gang was about to learn in an unforgettable way. Saturday afternoon at Riverside Park, on the outskirts of Austin, Texas, carried the usual refreshing air and lively atmosphere. Families gathered together, children ran across the grass, while teenagers were either glued to their phones or engaged in animated conversations. In a quiet corner beneath an old oak tree, 17-year-old Ethan sat silently. Engrossed in his book, he was waiting to pick up his younger sister, Sophia, after her basketball practice, just as he had promised their mother. Dressed in a neatly pressed white shirt, dark jeans, and spotless sneakers, Ethan wasn't the kind of person who stood out. But his peaceful moment was abruptly shattered when the deafening roar of motorcycle engines tore through the air. 4 men, clad in leather jackets and black full-face helmets, rode into the park. The crowd briefly glanced at them before returning to their conversations, treating their arrival as nothing more than a passing sight. But Ethan immediately sensed something was off. They hadn't just stopped their bikes, they were watching him. One of them, a tall man with a long scar across his cheek, smirked and muttered something to his companions. Then, with heavy steps and a challenging gaze, he strode toward Ethan. Ethan closed his book and looked up to meet his stare. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, he would have to call upon everything he had spent years training for. The scarred man stopped right in front of Ethan, arms crossed, his gaze cold and unreadable. The other 3 stood behind him, forming a subtle but unmistakable enclosure. Though the park remained crowded, no one seemed to notice the tension quietly building beneath the old oak tree. "What are you doing here, kid?" the scarred man asked, his raspy voice tinged with mockery. Ethan frowned slightly but maintained his calm demeanor. "Waiting for my sister," he replied simply, his voice steady, devoid of fear. The biker narrowed his eyes, as if displeased by Ethan's lack of reaction. "That so? This place doesn't seem like the right fit for you." Ethan caught the unspoken implication. He knew men like this, bullies who relied on intimidation to take control of a situation. But instead of reacting, he simply set his book aside, his gaze never leaving the man in front of him. "This is a public park," he responded, his voice even yet firm. The biker smirked, then suddenly leaned in closer, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "You seem like a smart one," he sneered. "I don't like kids who think they're smarter than they should be." Behind him, the other 3 chuckled. One of them took a step forward and casually nudged Ethan's backpack with his foot, as if testing the waters. Ethan remained still, his heartbeat quickened, but not out of fear. He was assessing the situation, every movement, every expression, every inch of distance between him and them. Because if this escalated any further, he would have to act. The scarred biker smirked, then suddenly reached out as if to grab Ethan's collar. Ethan instinctively shifted to the side, dodging the move with practiced ease while keeping himself composed. He knew that a single mistake, a sign of fear or an overly aggressive reaction, could push the situation past the point of control. "No need to be so tense, kid." The biker took a small step back, his cold, calculating eyes studying Ethan. "We're just having a conversation." Ethan met his gaze without flinching. "Then talk." His words were simple, but there was an underlying steel in his voice. That response clearly irritated them. One of the bikers, a shorter man with messy blonde hair, let out a dry chuckle. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," he sneered, "but guts don't mean you're smart." He lifted his foot and kicked Ethan's backpack again, harder this time. The bag tumbled slightly across the grass. A small, seemingly harmless action, but Ethan knew better. They were testing him. Before he could respond, a small voice rang out behind him. "Ethan?" He turned sharply. Sophia, his little sister, had just finished basketball practice and stood only a few feet away, sweat still glistening on her forehead. Her wide eyes flickered with confusion and concern. The blonde biker immediately turned his attention toward her, his lips curling into an unsettling smirk. "Oh, so this is your little sister?" he drawled, his tone dripping with something Ethan didn't like. A slow burn of anger rose in Ethan's chest. He wasn't thinking about himself anymore. Sophia shouldn't be here. He stood up, his expression darkening. "Go, Sophia," he said, his voice low but firm. But it was too late. The bikers had noticed her now. And Ethan knew. Things were about to get a whole lot worse. Sophia froze, her wide eyes darting between Ethan and the bikers as she realized just how bad the situation had become. She looked to her brother, as if waiting for him to fix everything. But Ethan didn't need to turn around to know what was happening. He could already feel the shift. The bikers had found a weakness to exploit. The blonde biker chuckled, his gaze lingering on Sophia with a dangerous glint. "Your little sister's pretty cute," he drawled, his voice deliberately slow. "Maybe I should teach her a little something about manners." "Huh?" His hand lifted, pointing lazily in her direction, as if this was all some kind of joke. But to Ethan, it wasn't a joke, it was the final line. He straightened, stepping forward in one fluid motion, placing himself firmly between them and his sister. He wasn't as physically imposing as the bikers, but the look in his eyes was sharper than ever. "Don't touch my sister." His voice was low and cold, unwavering. The scarred biker raised an eyebrow, as if surprised by the sudden shift in Ethan's demeanor. He exchanged glances with his crew before letting out a short, amused laugh. "Listen, kid." He stepped in closer, so close that Ethan could smell the stale stench of cigarettes on his breath. "I don't know who you think you are, but around here, we make the rules, and the rule is, your rules don't apply to me." Ethan cut in, his tone calm but carrying an unmistakable warning. For a second, the scarred man just stared. The smirk faded from his lips. Maybe this was the first time someone hadn't cowered before him. The tension between them stretched thin, ready to snap. Behind Ethan, Sophia clutched the straps of her bag tightly, holding her breath. She had never seen her brother like this before, calm, but razor sharp, as if every move he made was calculated to the last detail. A light breeze whispered through the park, but no one felt any relief. Everyone was waiting for the inevitable. The scarred biker clenched his jaw, then gave a sharp nod. "I want to see what this kid's got." The blonde biker moved instantly, lunging forward with a rough hand reaching for Ethan's shoulder. The moment the blonde biker's hand lunged forward, Ethan sidestepped smoothly, dodging the grab with precise efficiency. In the same instant, he caught the man's wrist, twisted it sharply, and wrenched it backward. Crack! A sickening pop echoed as the biker let out a scream of agony. He stumbled back, clutching his twisted wrist, eyes wide with disbelief. It had all happened too fast. The scarred biker wasn't smirking anymore. His expression darkened as he let out a furious growl and charged like a raging bull, throwing a powerful punch straight at Ethan's face. But Ethan had trained for this, for years. He didn't fight with brute force, he fought with precision and control. He dropped his stance, pivoting smoothly to evade the punch, then countered with a perfectly placed palm strike to the biker's chest. Thud! The strike landed squarely against his sternum, sending the scarred man staggering back, momentarily winded. "Bastard!" Another biker, the shorter one in a worn leather jacket, roared and lunged forward. He swung a wild hook, but Ethan was already moving. He slipped past the punch and swept his opponent's legs out from under him. The biker hit the ground hard. Before he could react, Ethan followed up with a swift, brutal kick to the gut. The man gasped, curling up in pain. The park had taken notice. People were turning their heads, some hurrying closer. Phones were out, recording. Ethan didn't care. He remained in his stance, relaxed, but ready. Only two bikers were still standing, but their confidence had shattered. The scarred man inhaled sharply, trying to push through the pain from Ethan's strike. His glare burned with a mix of rage and disbelief. For the first time, he realized that this wasn't just some kid. "You little shit," he growled, fists clenched. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." But Ethan didn't flinch. His expression remained steady, cold, and resolute. "I warned you." The scarred biker charged at Ethan again, this time with pure, unfiltered rage. He wasn't testing anymore, he just wanted to take the kid down. But Ethan wasn't afraid. The punch came fast and hard, but Ethan had already seen it coming. He sidestepped smoothly, deflecting the blow with precise control before countering with a sharp spinning kick to the biker's ribs. Thwack! The impact sent him stumbling, his face twisting in pain. But before he could regain his footing, Ethan was already there, closing the distance, driving his elbow straight into the man's sternum. The biker gasped, his breath completely knocked out of him. He staggered back, clutching his chest, eyes wide with disbelief. He couldn't comprehend how he was being outmatched by a teenager. The last biker standing, the blonde one whose wrist had been wrenched earlier, started to move forward. But then hesitated. His eyes darted between Ethan and his fallen crew. His confidence wavered. The hunters had become the hunted. Around them, murmurs spread through the crowd. Then, a few people started clapping. More joined in. Phones were held high, recording everything. Ethan took a steady breath, keeping his stance firm, but he didn't attack again. "That's enough," he said, his voice cutting through the evening air. "Leave." The scarred biker clenched his jaw, forcing himself upright. His face was twisted with pain and fury. But deep down, he knew, if he kept going, he would only humiliate himself further. He glared at Ethan, seething. "This isn't over, kid." Then, with a sharp nod to his crew, he turned. The bikers staggered to their motorcycles, revved their engines, and sped away, leaving behind a park full of applause and whispered conversations. Ethan remained still, his breathing controlled, his eyes locked onto the fading taillights. He knew, this might not be the end. But right now, Sophia was what mattered. She rushed to his side, her expression a mix of awe and worry. "Are you okay?" Ethan turned to her, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. He offered a small smile. "I'm fine." But deep inside, he knew, this wasn't truly over. On the way home, Sophia kept glancing at Ethan, her eyes still filled with awe. She had just witnessed her brother do things she had only ever seen in movies, taking down 3 grown men with precise, almost effortless movements. Finally, she spoke, her voice still a little shaky. How do you even know how to fight like that?" Ethan smiled and shook his head. "That wasn't fighting, Sophia, that was self-defense." He paused for a moment before turning to look at her directly. "The important thing isn't about beating someone. It's about controlling yourself, and only using force when there's no other choice." Sophia nodded slowly, as if trying to commit his words to memory. But then, a sudden thought made her frown. "But, they said this isn't over. What if they come back?" Ethan stopped walking. He turned to his sister, his expression serious. "If they come back, I'll face them, just like today. Not because I like fighting, but because I won't let anyone push me around. And I won't let anyone hurt the people I care about." They stepped onto their front porch, where their mother was already waiting, her face filled with a mix of concern and curiosity. Ethan took a deep breath, knowing he would have to explain everything. But he had no regrets. Because today, he hadn't just protected Sophia, he had proven something important. True strength doesn't come from muscles or intimidation. It comes from control, discipline, and the courage to stand up for what's right.